discuss the principle of the necessity for action, and that we all have an innate nature, and there are actions that we will be cast into performing due to our innate nature, so that there's this way of recognizing that there are some actions we can't avoid. And in this case, this is coming up because Arjuna is trying to get out of the battle. And Krishna is trying to remind Arjuna, wait a second, battle is action. Going off into the woods isn't going to do it. If everybody went off into the woods, if everybody goes off and transcends into nirvana, then the world is left to chaos. And there's a reason we were born in these bodies, and this is the home, this is the mother for consciousness to wake up to itself. When we transcend this domain of bodies and mind and emotion and story, yes, we go to the Father, we go to the origin, the Sat. But then we leave the mother behind. The seat of the originating of the ego is what allows consciousness to wake up to its nature when it becomes the Father. But to not return back down and to assist the mother in her evolutionary purpose, we're shirking the job. That's why action is such an important conversation. And it'll be throughout the entire Gita. It's not just the process of us freeing ourselves from our habituated, programmed, egoic existence so that we can return to our original pure condition. It's also to bring it into life, bring it back to the mother, bring it back to the seat of who we are as a means of integrating it and making that real. And in that way, we lift the collective consciousness. So action is key throughout the whole Gita. And so we're going through chapter 3 in the first pass, the yoga of action, but we'll keep coming back to this principle of conscious action, yogic action, purposeful action. Other action is not purposeful. It's driven by impulse and inclination and attraction and repulsion. It's driven by preferences and desires and wants and angers. These are just tangling us. It's like a string, a bundle of karma that we're continuously building and building and building and building and building. And as long as we're being driven by these inclinations, we're just simply perpetuating the existing condition and actually assuring our future bondage and the limitation of all those around us. Unwitting perpetuation of everybody else, wrapping more string in their ball of story and belief and habit and experience and impressions and ideas, and until it is what it always is. But it's a continuous process, this wrapping and accumulating karma, accumulating consequences, avoiding experiences, and staying in unconsciousness and staying in habitual existence. That's what action does. You see, action without thinking, action that's done from impulse, binds you. And it will perpetuate itself because action carries the power that expresses itself through you in the creation. And as long as you're operating unconsciously, well, you're still expressing the error of the evolutionary process. You're still expressing the unconscious, not knowing where it's going, that's existed up to the point where you become self-aware, and then you can discover where it is you're actually going and what its purpose is. So as long as you're taking actions without consciously intending, without consciously setting a trajectory for yourself, it's bondage, it's karma, it's just more delusion. You're not getting out of it. Not that way. Only yogic action. That means action that is based on the principle of truth, the principle of oneness. Action that has its foundation in the fundamental truth of existence, the Brahman, the Sat. Action that's aligned with that fundamental intent, that first intent to bring forward, to wake up from the Brahman, to come from its unmanifest condition into its fully expressed manifest condition, and to wake up to itself. That's the dharma that we actually have. That's the work that goes on in action. But in the process, it makes a lot of error along the way. It creates a lot of karma along the way. And as long as that karma exists, you're going to just be perpetuating that existing capacity of nature to evolve, which is slow. It falls, rises, takes thousands and thousands of years. But when we wake up, when we become aware of ourselves through the process of dejection, when we get aware that there is this discrimination, that we're the soul, we're not this bounded, locked up structure of habits and wind up Energizer bunny acting out its unconscious impulses. We are something other than that. We're the animating principle. We're the foundational structure in which these things actually run. We're the juice that powers that unconscious habitual pattern. And when we wake up to that, to our discrimination, then yogic action is possible. Prior to that, it's not. So yogic action is purposeful action. And that's the thing to remember here in the Gita. When we're talking about action, we're just not talking your normal inclinations of action, your little habitual things that you do every single day, your usual reactions and concerns and judgments and all that other content. We're talking about purposeful action, conscious action. So where we left off in chapter 3 was a revelation of the nature of what we call sacrifice, that everything in creation, if it's knowing or not, is serving a higher purpose. It's giving up a part of itself so that the rest of the creation can continue to move on. And that the ocean gives up its moisture into the air, becomes clouds and rains and storms, and then the sky, the clouds and the rain, the sky gives up its moisture into the land. The land then absorbs that moisture and gives its moisture up to the trees and the grasses and the fruiting of existence. And then they give up their fruit or their substance to the next level of species in evolution, and they eat off of that. And the next stage gives itself up as a sacrifice. And in this way, we maintain the world order. In this way, we allow evolution to continue. If we broke that cycle, if we damaged that cycle, then we endanger the evolutionary intent. And then we go off track, and the earth starts heating up, and we poison ourselves, and we kill off species. Because we're no longer operating selfishly as a species. We're operating without consciousness. We're just going forward with the same survive or succeed at any cost attitude. And this is then outside of the alignment, so we end up eating the sin of our actions, not realizing that our purpose on this planet is to give, is to offer up, is to sacrifice for something other than our individual egoic sense of self, be it mental or emotional or physical. So without this giving, we become bound. And even when we give, if we have an expectation associated, linked up with that giving, then we're attached to the giving, then it's also bondage. So if we give for any other reason than to give, if we give for any other reason than as an offering, to lift those, to lift the world, to improve the world in whatever way in our light we can see, then we continue to create bondage. Our expectation for a feedback for our generosity or a gift then determines if we can feel good about it or not good about it. When we don't feel good about it, then we're resentful. One set up for suffering is expectations. As soon as you got expectations, you're back into karma. Because no matter what happens, even if they're fulfilled, it's still karma. And if they're not fulfilled, then it's more karma. It's just karma and karma and karma and karma until you wake up to the truth of who you are. And then your actions become yogic. This is the key. When you're giving your actions, if you're taking actions as a sacrifice or an offering, in itself, you're operating in a poise, a state of consciousness that's poised, and it's able to be fulfilled as it is, and it's taking action in that state of fulfillment without needing any outcome, without needing any result, but only taking the actions that are required or necessary for your intent, for your yogic purpose to be fulfilled. So Krishna is bringing this up because the principle of yogic action says you don't have to be in a cave, you don't have to be in an ashram, you don't have to be going seminars, you don't have to be going on the online and reading all the spiritual different teachers or reading spiritual books. All you have to do is realize that everything that's arising in your life is an opportunity for yogic action. And to come forward into your day-to-day actions, whatever they may be, in that witnessing consciousness, in that place of orientation to you as the soul, to you as the occupying presence. And when you're operating from that inward alertness, then what you outwardly do is secondary. Certainly you try to have that your actions be effective, that they produce the result that's needed. If you're washing dishes, then you wash the dishes the best that you can at that moment, so that the dishes are as clean as they can make it. And that's the perfect, efficient expression of the truth in that moment. Somehow doing dishes came to you. Maybe it was your turn. Maybe somebody yelled at you about not doing your dishes. Whatever be the reason, then you do your dishes from that yogic place. And you just do the action. Not expecting anybody to say, oh, good, you finally did the dishes. No. You just do the dishes. Then no matter where you are, you can be a husband, a wife, you can be a businessman, you can be a warrior. It doesn't make any difference because everything in your life becomes a sadhana, becomes spiritual practice. This is the gist, the key of what yogic action is about. This reclaiming action as a means of transcending the habitual activity of the ocean of samskaras, the ocean of vasanas, impressions and inclinations. And this is how we begin to unwind our ball of string. This is how we begin to unwind the existing karmas when we start performing action not invested in the outcome, not wanting a certain kind of result, not expecting it to be a certain way. We begin to unwind those inclinations in us by taking those yogic actions. They neutralize the inclination and they begin to disengage the habit of whining, and it begins to unwind. That's good. Disengages the habit of whining. I like that. The endless whining. I don't have what I want. I don't like it how it is. I want it different. That's whining, right? That's the karma. You're creating karma when you're whining. So if you want to know when you're creating karma, notice if you're whining. And when you're unwinding, you can only unwind if you're resting in a different place than the normal egoic paradigm. It's only when you've come to a state where you have a sense of your soul, a sense of that inner quality that lives you, that's quiet and still. When, from that sense, then yogic action is possible. That's why chapter 3 follows chapter 2. Without the discrimination of chapter 2, to know what's the difference between soul and everything else, then you can't do chapter 3. You can't do yogic action. Now, of course you can do action. Everybody is habituated to bondage. Everybody's used to swimming in this ocean of samskara, this delusion. So coming out of this delusion, how we do it? Conscious, effortful, intentional action, which the Gita tells us we start by controlling the senses. We start by controlling the object in which the sense gets hooked in. Somebody says something to us, or we hear from somebody something derogatory about us. That's what we hear is the object of our senses. And when we take it inside of us, then we have that reaction that goes on if it's a derogatory thing. And all that action that's going on is karma. It's reinforcing the inclination of bondage. It's reinforcing the delusion. So the secret is that when you hear the derogatory statement and it comes in and you find yourself activated, then you notice, look at this. I'm activated. I'm plugged in. I got something going on here. Okay, so this is the fruit of this is the object of my senses, spinning me. The tail wagging the dog. There's almost no dog. The dog's this little thing, and the tail's this huge thing. The tail is wagging the little dog, which has not yet got big enough that it can resist the wagging of the tail. So the tail is wagging the dog, and so you only have enough to notice you're being wagged. You're being whipped around by this habitual programming, this habitual pattern of reaction. So to cut the object of the senses, to detach from the object of senses, is to quit believing it, is to withdraw your consent to run down that track, to go on that wheel, to get revenge or to beat yourself up and go into recriminations and guilt and doubt. All of that just feeds the same thing. Or to come back and say something to someone else about them and then cause the whole gossip thing to go, where you're trying to create agreement for your position in order to defeat their position. This endless heckling, this endless whining and heckling that runs everything. It's the human atmosphere. When you step out of this atmosphere and you descend back into it, you say, who would want to be here? So you cut that investment. You say, okay, I'm going to take yogic action. I'm going to let go or become present with that which is arising in me, with myself as the source of my own experience. And I'm going to look to find a way to accept or forgive whatever it is that came to me, so that it's not about me beating myself up or me getting back at them. It's neither. It's to accept, okay, this is what happened. They said this. I heard this. That I had this reaction. This went on. And you be present with that reaction. You notice how it turns your gut. Notice how your mind keeps whirling and you can't go to sleep or you can't rest. And you say, okay, there's the consequences. That's what's going on. And when you're with that enough, it starts losing its ability to keep wagging you, to keep gripping you, to keep throwing you around on the merry-go-round. This is the purpose of self-inquiry. And we'll get into that in chapter 4. So now we're going to continue on. We're going to start chapter 3, verse 136. Satchamayi is going to be the next few chapters until I tell her to stop.
Okay, chapter 1, no, verse 136.
Excuse me.
But the man who always dwells in the self derives satisfaction from the self and is able to enjoy the delight of the self. For him there is no karma. He has nothing to gain from action, nor anything to lose due to inaction in this world, and he does not depend on anyone for anything. Therefore, you should always perform your ordained duties remaining detached. Thus, doing work without attachment, one can attain the supreme.
Okay. So this is a summary of what I've just been saying. Here the Gita is using the word self with a capital S to indicate the soul. So we'll just stay with that reference as a understanding, is that when you are able, in verse 136, who can dwell in the self, this training yourself to be in relationship to the soul, this getting familiar through practice and meditation, to contemplation, you begin to rest in that state of consciousness. You step out of the paradigm. You transcend the habit of your egoic doingness. And when you're in that transcendent state, then when you come back down into the world, it's more natural, it's easier to let go of the reactions and the habitual patterns of our egoic self, our structure of bondage. We then don't get overtaken as much. We have more ability to say no. Now, one who is able to derive satisfaction from that state of consciousness, who is in that ability to appreciate the value of being connected to the soul or the self, then the emphasis on what other people think of you, or the difficulty of what's before you, or all these other concerns or conditions we have about the outer world, or our little desires or preferences that we have about going on in us about the world, they all quiet. They're not hammering as loudly. They're not overtaking you as totally. And so there's more ability to discriminate, to say, oh wow, look at this. Look at this, what arose. I had this come up for me today. I was noticing my system is rajas. So I'm going through the day and I'm noticing a lot of things aren't working. And I'm paying attention to this part of me that is pushing. There's this restlessness. It's pushing to get one thing done, to get the next thing done. So I'm noticing the rajas puts me into future time where I'm not with what I'm doing because I'm anticipating the next thing I want to do. And then if anything comes up and says, no, you're not going to be able to do this, or it's going to be difficult. There's 4 people in the line in front of you, and each person, including the cashier, is going about this in their own dharmic way, and it's not the way my rajas wants it to be. Then you're in this state of the condition, right? So I'm noticing this going on with me. I'm noticing how god-awful it is to be in rajas sometimes while it's occurring. And I'm okay. I'm not changing anything. I'm still doing the things. And what happens is, I have to be patient. And then I'm noticing that part of my ego is restless. And my being is just waiting. Not pleasant, not unpleasant, just waiting. And then the next thing happens. Without this sense of connection to the self, then you're going to believe you are your mood. You're going to believe you're this particular cycle of restlessness, or this particular cycle of obscurity and resistance, which is tamas. You had a question? No. Why there isn't any karma is that even though the raja's going on and it's irritated, it's not affecting me. It doesn't, these things aren't leaving any trace. As soon as I leave the situation, it's disappeared. There's no residue. There's no lingering. There's no taking that difficult, projecting it into the future. I don't need to, because when rajas is doing it, it's doing rajas in every new moment. So. But there is this, it's in each situation, it's different. So the bottom line of it is it's not adding or taking anything away from what is arising. It's just what is arising. And in that context, karma is not created. Consequences are not created. Furthering, supporting the habitual pattern of day-to-day life based on desire and fear and identification and attachment is not being supported. It's basically unwinding that part of my nature that in the past would be very pushy about getting everything I wanted to be done. And it's unwinding that inclination to believe that pushiness. So I let somebody else come in front of the line. So in that moment, what am I sacrificing? I'm sacrificing my ego's inclination to get ahead of the line. I'm doing a different thing. I'm letting someone else come in front of the line. My ego, over here, what are you doing? You know, you've got all these other things to do. Today you're doing Gita class, you don't have any time. And what I'm doing, I'm neutralizing it by taking an opposite action from what the inclination is there. I'm asserting my authority as the conscious being that occupies the vehicle. This is yogic action. He has nothing to gain from action or anything to lose due to inaction. Why is that? Because the fulfillment exists. Rest in the self derives satisfaction from the self. There is nothing out there that I need or want. I'm fulfilled. So all my actions are simply coming from what is required, from what's necessary, based on in this dimension. What is my ordained duty? What is my dharma at this dimension? And then it says in verse 138, always perform your ordained duties remaining detached. Okay, now I've got to tell you about this. As long as you're just beginning this process, you're not going to be detached. When you're beginning this process, you're going to get hooked in, and it's going to run its course, and you're going to be depleted, and you're going to feel like shit, because Rajas always leads to Tamas, because you got hooked in, and it's going to exhaust you, and then you'll move on. And at some point, you'll say, I did it again. I got stuck in again. Here I am in the soup, being stirred like everybody else. And then you begin to wake up to the fact that this isn't the way you want to live, this isn't the purpose of your life, that this isn't aligned with the discrimination that's come to you. And you begin over time to move more and more into the right balance between the transcendence and the transformation. The right, how much time do you need to spend in relationship to yourself, to the soul, proportional to the amount of activity that you have to be engaged in the outer world. What you'll notice is that if the transcendence is proportional to the transformation, you will be able to be conscious when you're in the content of your life. But if it's not, if it's weak, you didn't meditate, you haven't been busy, you've been doing other things, you've not been paying attention to yourself, then you'll get overtaken. So the idea of detached action is like a target, but it's actually a symptom. It's a symptom of what happens when you spend enough time connected to yourself as the soul. It's not like wrong if you're attached to the outcome of your action. It's not wrong if you find yourself with an expectation and disappointed with an outcome. It's just the condition. And then if you beat yourself up and said, I must be an awful yogi, I'm so attached to the outcome, I can't seem, then you're just feeding the same thing again. You're just creating more karma. The only way you can come out of this mess, this, you lose either way, is by transcendence, by knowing yourself as the soul. And although the Gita, in this chapter, is speaking about this bringing the transcendence of the self into life, it's a continuous process. And over time, and that's the point of the Gita, over the chapters of the Gita, this transcendence comes more and more naturally, even while you're in the midst of the not transcended state. Okay, let's continue.
Many wise men like Janaka have reached the perfect state by performing the yoga of action only. You too can attain that state by performing action for the maintenance of world order. Men of simple faith always follow great men. Whatever great men do, common people follow them. Arjuna, there is nothing for me to do in the three worlds, nor is there anything worth attaining for me. Yet I am always working. If I cease to work, great harm will occur because men always follow me in all matters. If I cease to work, these worlds will perish, and I shall be the cause of confusion and destruction.
Okay, this references to the idea of what is the duty of an enlightened being. What is the duty of an awakened being? What is the relationship of a wise man in relationship to the unwise world? How should we be? How should we act? What is our purpose? So it's pointing to this, that's saying that there is this principle of maintaining world order. I talked about this before. Why do we maintain world order? So that nature can fulfill its evolutionary purpose. And why do we do this? Because without the help of transcendent being, nature gets overtaken by the forces that have of the error of the evolutionary process, and it goes into disillusionment. It goes into chaos. It starts falling apart. So when a transcendent being chooses to come back into the world and take yogic action, it lifts it gives nature the strength of consciousness to continue to follow its evolutionary purpose. And this is why Krishna, who's at the fully enlightened state, is saying, even though there is no reason for me to act, there's nothing I need from this world at all. I am completely fulfilled. I choose to come down into this condition in order to support nature's evolutionary purpose. Because if I don't recognize that what I do or don't do affects the collective possibility of the manifestation for this intent, the collective actualization of truth consciousness on the planet, if I pretend it doesn't make any difference, then nature gets overtaken. There's the old adage is that all man has to do in order for evil to dominate is to not take action. So this is saying that for the transcendent being to stay in nirvana is not supporting the mother that allowed you to get to nirvana. It's not fulfilling the very principle that allowed you to wake up to the truth of who you are. And that therefore, in this chapter, he is saying that even I, fully enlightened, come to this dimension. And I take action thanklessly, without expectation, in order to support the mother in her purpose to bring forward higher and higher capacities of nature to accept and allow consciousness. So we're all interconnected. We're all part of oneness. When one part of us comes to a higher state of consciousness, we get closer to the source. We come closer to the origin of all beings. The lower we are, the more we're at the level of all beings. The higher we go, the less we're at the level of higher beings, and the closer we are to the originating intent. So the actions of one who is transcendent significantly is much more powerful, have a much greater impact than one who's still invested in the content of life. Someone who does not know that they're anything but the human animal. They have very little power. And because we're all in this interconnected, to not take action is allowing the world to fall to whatever it may do. It's saying, oh, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference that I don't act. I'm fulfilled. So it's actually a form of selfishness. And this is why beings who go to transcendence only, who come to nirvana and live in the cave and stay in the ashram, they come back because they have an inherent responsibility to support the mother that allowed them to come to that state of consciousness. And they have to come back and fulfill that service, to fulfill that dharma before it completes. So Krishna is saying transcendence is important. It is important. But this yogic action is the means by which that transcendence can be completely fulfilled. It's when the transcendence comes into the world, transforms the vibration of the world, so there's no need for transcendence anymore. There doesn't have to be transcendence and non-transcendence. They start integrating, and they come to a place where both states of consciousness can coexist. That's what he's pointing to. And that's what Krishna represents. in all spiritual tradition. This integrated state where you're an individual, you're a person, you're an ego with inclinations, and you're also the universe, the vast awareness, the infinity, concurrently. Universal and individual, impersonal and personal, all at the same time. So this is what he's saying. There's a dharma in this journey. This yogic action is not just for our own liberation. This yogic action is for the world. It's for the creation. And that we make a difference in this process because we're all interconnected. And if we act or don't act, even as human beings, we're affecting everyone else. But powerfully, we're affecting everybody else as we transcend and move closer to the truth. As we get closer to the center of every other being living, then the choices we make, the sacrifices we make, is for all people who perhaps aren't capable of making that sacrifice. In the same way Jesus Christ is said to have sacrificed for mankind, he went through an ordeal he didn't have to go through, so that the rest of mankind wouldn't have to go through this ordeal themselves. And this is the possibility that the Gita is beginning to point to right at this early stage of the journey. This maintenance of world order is the sacrifice of the divine being. Okay.
A wise man should guide the ignorant by himself performing action in detachment instead of creating confusion in their minds. Actions are performed by the modes of Prakriti, but the ignorant person whose mind is deluded attaches doership to every action and thinks, I am the doer. The knower of truth is well aware of the relationship between gunas and actions and remains neutral because he knows that gunas are interacting with gunas. The man of perfect knowledge should not confuse the minds of those who are completely identified with the gunas.
Okay. So in these verses, the Gita is basically saying, don't try to tell other people how to behave. Don't try to tell somebody how they should fix themselves. Don't bother. Because the way you actually change things is by your example, by doing it yourself, by being the demonstration of it. This capacity to take action and sacrifice creates what we would call a nobility in the soul, a quality of nobility, which automatic evokes a respect or an admiration from people. It's like we recognize that this is a noble soul. We recognize that this person is not just living for themselves in the ordinary course of life. There's this recognition, and when you have that kind of recognition, what the Gita is saying, the great man, then you teach through your example. It's like when I first saw a picture of my first teacher, Mera Baba, on the wall of this commune when I was 19 years old and an indulgent, rebellious child. And I saw this maturity, this patience, and this love in his face. It was, he had brought forward through his yogic action a quality of nobility that even an idiot could see it and recognize that this is actually where I wish to go, not where I am. So you teach through your example, not through your teachings. You teach through who you are. We make a difference for our children, not do what I tell you to do, not what I do. We teach that we, through us doing what it is we want our children to do, we are the example. We change the world through our sacrifice. We change the world through that willingness to step out of this identification with the human condition. And don't try to confuse somebody with having this conversation when they're still locked in to how can I get benefit? How can I avoid diminishing? How can I use this to help me in my life, my relationship, and my money making? Don't bother. Don't bother. Because if they can't see the nobility, then you had no role anyway. And if you try to teach when there's no listening, it's just creating karma. It's just back into the old morass that everyone else is doing. So don't bother. Now, there is appropriateness to teach when someone's at a certain stage. This is why the Gita is revealed to an Arjuna. When someone comes to the stage of Arjuna, when they come to a dejection, when they come to that place of the discrimination where they say, I am lost, I don't know what to do, please show me the way. Now maybe they don't verbalize these words, but there's a longing, a looking, a cry for this. Then this knowledge, this information can help them begin and stabilize on their journey. And this is the purpose of the Gita. And at the very end of the Gita, you'll see this, he'll restate this about this role, or how do we teach this? We teach it by living it. We teach by being it. This is integrity. This is integration. Only those who know themselves as the self or the soul can do the great sacrifices. Only those who have reached a place of detachment and freedom from pain and pleasure and preference, from repulsion and attraction, only they can do the sacrifices that can lift mankind. Okay, let's continue.
With your mind fixed on me, the Supreme Self, Arjuna, dedicate all your actions to me, and be free from attachment and desire. Thus, freeing yourself from grief, fight the battle. Men who follow this path with devotion and uncavaling spirit are released from the bondage of action. But those who do not follow this path and find fault with this teaching, know them to be men of ignorance, and they are lost. All beings, even the wise, follow their innate nature. How far can one go with external restraint only? Attraction and repulsion are rooted in the senses for their objects. One should never be a victim of these two, because they are formidable enemies on the path of yoga. Your own path, even if devoid of apparent merits, is better than others that appear to you to be easy. It is better to face death while pursuing your own path than to follow another's path. It may be fraught with danger.
Okay, so these verses, the first part of these verses, just reinforce and give more detail about what I've been talking to up to now. So what the Gita is giving you a little additional information in these last two verses, which is this pull of attraction and repulsion. To be attracted to something, to be repulsed by something else. They have their basis in our individuality, where we've determined who we are in relationship to the information we receive through the senses. And that determines ways we want to feel about ourselves and ways we don't want to feel about ourselves. Way we want the world to be and the way we don't want the world to be. These structures of attraction and repulsion are all pervasive. So this mechanism is what is running the dog being run by the tail. This is what keeps us in the field of bondage, is when we go towards that which we're attracted to. What is it that's inclining us to go towards that which is our preferences? To what we're attracted to is we're still seeking something outside of the fulfillment of our being. And what causes us to withdraw, pull back from that which we're repulsed by, that we don't want to experience, what we don't want to feel, both inward or outwardly, is also perpetuating the same wrapping, keeping in place the existing condition. Well, this is key. This idea of being able to have your attractions equal to your repulsions. To be able to be with your repulsion as equally as being with your attraction. And not taking action based on either if there is something in the necessity of the moment that requires you not to. There's no problem or sin in attraction repulsion except through our avoidance, our desire, and our fear. The desire for what we're attracted to and our fear for what we're unattracted, that we're repulsed by. This is what keeps the bondage. If you're noting yourself being repulsed, then what you do is you move forward towards it. You got somebody who's difficult in the house, or someone difficult in your life, you take their picture and you put them on the altar, and you stay present with them, noticing the repulsion, and enter into the repulsion. And then you'll find, if your consciousness, if you're in yogic action, this is a yogic action, to choose to do that is a yogic action. Then your purposeful action. When you take a purposeful action, the Brahman is there. That means your consciousness automatically lifts when you take the intent to meet that which you're repulsed with. And as you're with them, you begin to see the nature of that repulsion, and you begin to own your part in that repulsed process until you realize that there is no repulsion except for in here. So you put them on the altar until you're able to be with them either in neutrality or acceptance, forgiveness, or love. And then you've completed that. You've unwound that particular inclination with that particular personality type in your life. That's yogic action. So these are very powerful forces. Or if you even have the attraction one, where you're, I've got to have this, I've got to get this. This is so important to me. That having it was everything. And then somehow, if that desire for having it is what you be present with, and instead of acting on what it tells you, instead of believing it, you step back and you watch it pull at you. The attraction pulls at you, right? It's a pull. Right? It's not a word repulsion. It's like, it's got to have it. This frenzy, right? And what happens when we don't get what we want? Ever notice what happens to you when you don't get what you want, especially when you really want it? That's anger comes up. That's when you meet your rajas. Very interesting, very pointing, these two verses, these two statements in verse 153. This gives you a whole arena in which to work as yogic action. Lots of material exists in this dimension. And then this caution, don't try to avoid the things you don't want to experience. The bottom line of it is, it's repulsive, so therefore let's get out of the situation where I'm repulsed. Or if it's attractive, I should go into the situation that I'm attracted to. No. You be where you are. You meet the thing that you're repulsed by or attracted to, and you stay with it. This is your path. There is no other path. It's not greener on the other side. Wherever you go, there you are. So don't fool yourself. There is no other path than right here, right now. What's showing up for you right here, right now. This is the gem of these verses. Okay, so let's continue.
Arjuna asked, then what is that force that compels man to commit sin, even against his own will? The Blessed Lord said, this is the force of desire and anger that comes out of Rajas. It is powerful, extremely harmful, and it is the real enemy. As fire is covered by smoke and mire is covered by dust, as embryo is enveloped by the membrane, so also knowledge is covered by desire and anger. Arjuna, wisdom is covered by this eternal enemy called desire. It is like insatiable fire. The senses, mind, and intellect are said to be the abode of this enemy, and the light of truth is absorbed by these agents, thus diluting the embodied being. Therefore, you must control your senses and kill this powerful enemy that covers truth and wisdom. Senses are said to be more powerful than the body, but greater than the senses is the mind. Superior to the mind is the intellect, and superior to the intellect is the self. Therefore, Arjuna, knowing that which is superior to the intellect, control your mind through reasoning and kill this formidable enemy called desire. Thus ends the 3rd chapter of Gita, entitled The Yoga of Action.
Here in these last verses of the 3rd chapter, he really gives you the job, the work, the task before you, right? Because action is rajas. That's the guna, action. And when action is motivated by desire and anger, then desire creates anger. Anger creates desire. When you're caught into that structure, you are completely absorbed in the mechanism of delusion. You're immediately wrapping new veils, new string around that capacity in you to know the truth of who you are. All you have to do is experience it. Like I said, if you really want something and then you're frustrated and you don't get it, watch. You'll see delusion run its number. You'll get swept away, resentment and anger and hatred, all of it, raging, will rise up in response to that frustrated rajas. And the Gita is saying, this is the real enemy. This will smash you. This will destroy your ability to access yourself for a period of time, not forever. If you didn't have the right for information, yes, maybe a long time. But if you're engaged in conscious yogic action, you will come out of it. But it will always be a devastation. The Gita talks about this in chapter 2, at the end of chapter 2, where it talks about the nature of the fall, verses 109, 1 and 10, where the attachment to the senses comes when the consciousness is allowed to dwell on sense objects. So when you become attached to having what you want, that's dwelling on the sense object. And once you get attached to that, there's desire. Now I want that more and more. The more you focus on it, the more you want it. And if you can't want it, the more frustrated you become. If you can't get it when you want it, you get angry. And then this anger comes delusion, like I said, right? It just comes in like veils, and it veils every component. It veils your vital, it veils your physical, it veils your mental. You lose the ability to discriminate. You lose anything. You're caught up in this one obsession and the reaction to this one obsession. And what is true, you can't step back. You can't get any distance. It sucks you in, and you're in this whirlwind. This is probably where the Gita, Krishna, is strongest in his statement of there is an enemy. It's in this rajas. Rajas is the real battle. The inclination to change, the inclination to take action, the impulse for action, all the qualities that throw us to action other than yogic action. These are what keep you veiled. This is what thwarts your ability to progress on the spiritual path. This unexamined way of being, when it gets the drama that comes from the vital drives, overtakes you and just smashes you against the shore of samskaras, just crashes you. And the repercussions go on and on and on. Desire and anger, the real enemy. So then he says, and this is his guidance, and this is the guidance. You must control your senses. You must notice the signal when it comes in. That's the only way you can control it. You've got to be present when the signal comes in and it sets off the motion. You've got to catch it when it triggers the inclination, the machinery, which is basically like buttons, right? Some people have lots of buttons, right? You push their buttons. You heard that adage? Somebody pushes my button. That's your attraction or repulsion, or it's your desire or your anger from previous experiences. And if you have low tolerance for being frustrated, then you can be raging. You'll become the danger creature. You become the one everybody will want to avoid or dodge because you're not getting what you want. Right? Tantrum child, raging adult, tantrum child. If I can't get what I want, then I don't care about anything. I'll just destroy, I'll just smash, I'll just ruin yourself and everyone around you. See, this is the karma. This is what binds the consciousness. This goes to show that there's an immaturity in a part of your system that has not come to sufficient detachment. And this is the real battle. In the case of Arjuna, his vital was very strong. He was the master of his fate. He had things the way he wanted them. He controlled his world, so when he wanted something, he got it. And to be frustrated in that would send him off on a tizzy. And that's why he said, and we in the West, I assure you, are just like Arjuna. We have been indulged. We've been able to get what we want. We've been able to control our world so that when we do get that we're usually guaranteed to get what we want. If we haven't, then this particular force is not as likely to overtake you so totally. So this occurs with people who are motivated to do yoga. People who are motivated to aspire for God, then you become frustrated and disillusioned, and you become angry and resentful when you can't make progress. We convert the very thing that takes us free from anger and desire into another way to be angry and desiring. You got to be alert. You have to be present by recognizing that you have to control that reaction. And now he's saying in verse 161, this is how you do it. The senses are more powerful than the body. All right? Why is that? Well, the body will just, if it didn't have the senses, would just be bouncing around this way and that way. So the senses guide the body. The senses tells this is hot, or this is sharp, or this will hurt, or this will feel good, or this not. So the senses rule the body. And what rules the senses is the mind. It says, okay, well, if I eat too much of this, then I'm not going to feel good. So my mind says I'm not going to eat too much of this. Or if I exercise, I feel good, and if I don't exercise, I don't. So the mind says, okay, I'll exercise. So the mind can rule the inclinations of the senses. And superior to the mind is the intellect. Now here's what this comes up. This is when you have a purpose that's higher than the purpose that you've had up to now. When you set a goal for yourself through the intelligence, through the intellect, and you start strategizing and planning, well, these helps the going beyond the way the mind has interpreted things up to that point, and it starts lifting, coming out of its familiar paradigm and stepping into a larger paradigm. So the intellect I call as the intelligence, the ability to sense another possibility than the current one you're living. This ability to step out of the existing point of view, to begin to step out of an existing point of view. We've gone through this through our whole life, right? You come out of elementary school, you're top of the rung of elementary school, and you're at the bottom of the rung at high school, right? You come out of the top of the rung of high school, and you're at the bottom of the rung of college. So this such is life. So we're constantly managing our lower nature through our intelligence. Someone tells us, well, it's always like that when you're a freshman. Or, it'll get better when you're a junior. So endure it calmly. So the mind is saying, I hate it, I don't know anybody, I don't like anybody. So the intelligence takes us transcending. But once the intelligence has gotten its way, or it's been successful to a certain extent, what's more powerful than intelligence? And that's the psychic, the soul, the part of you that feels to listen to this conversation, the part of you that is pulled to recover your divine nature. Once that happens, all the other subsequent layers of yourself will follow more quickly. So the intellect can control the senses more powerfully than the mind. And the psychic, the soul, the self, can control the senses more powerfully than the intellect. So the effectiveness is know yourself as the soul, and you'll all automatically control your senses. Stay in who you are as the being, as the soul, the self, and automatically your senses will moderate their ability to run you or influence you or shape you. That's the key, that's the secret of the Bhagavad Gita in this chapter. Through transcendence, you will be able to be more capable in operating in the non-transcendent state. You'll be bringing something of your transcendence, and you'll be lifting the condition in which you found yourself into another vibration than where it was before. automatically, naturally, just by being connected to the soul. These are techniques. This is the technique of yogic action. Just like there's a technique of knowledge, there's also a technique of yogic action. So you take this knowledge and you apply it, and it becomes a technique. And that's what the Gita is pointing to. You may not have detachment at first, but you have an attention to get more and more detached, less and less hooked in. And therefore you could keep taking actions that support you in this movement towards greater and greater transcendence from within the condition you find yourself. It's not to go off into the woods or the caves or the mountains, because whatever transcendence you have there will not last as soon as it re-enters into the world, because it hasn't been tested. It hasn't been made true. It hasn't sacrificed itself in order to lift up the existing condition and those other parts of itself. Okay. So that's the completion of chapter 3. And next session we will proceed into chapter 4, where he will take us out of this arena of battling and work and sacrifice into this, how do we move into relationship, a more profound relationship to the soul, Okay. Namaste. Now let's finish with the meditation.